Please don't swear. So, Paul Allen, an awesome professional in the legal community. And I'm going to stop at that point and reshare my screen just to show you how I met Paul back in 2015 in November. And one of the first things we did together was climb 1,237 steps up to a Buddha. And that climb was frankly exhausting for the 8 or 10 of us that did it. But one man who did it, and he did it at approximately 147 kilos, was this version of Paul Allen. So Paul, welcome. I'd love to hear your story. We'd love to hear your story. And yes, welcome to the group. Oh, I'm checking, but are you unmuted?
I was on mute. Classic. Yeah, that was me at the top of 1,227 steps on my first ever 2BYB in Thailand. And I remember very well walking up those steps with an Iron Man named David Labouchere. And yeah, it was a really great achievement for me on that day. I think I'd bound up the steps now, hopefully, but things have certainly changed since then.
So Paul, just take us back all the way for me to your background and perhaps even sort of 5 minutes on where you came from.
Sure. So you might be able to tell from my accent that while I live in Dubai, I'm not from Dubai. I grew up in Brisbane, and in 2003, my sweet 16, Jules, and I got married. We started going out together when we were 16 years old, and we've been together ever since. I'm now 44, so you do the math. We got married in 2003, and after getting married, we knew that we wanted to explore the world, and my ambition was to become an IT and outsourcing specialist lawyer. And we thought, well, where can we do all of that? And we set our sights on getting to London. By August 2008, we were in London. Jules had lined up a job before we left, which meant that we had the money for the rent and for the pints. So we were all sorted, but I didn't have a job at the time. I got to London and then started doing my interviewing. I'd already set my sights on getting a job at DLA because they were recognized as a TMT award-winning firm already. I interviewed with them 5 weeks after arriving, and on the 6th week started at our Noble Street office and have been with the firm ever since. So that's nearly 17 years ago. I then worked on large-scale IT and outsourcing programs, both in the public and private sector, for 4 years. The one that I started working on was the £12 billion program for the National Health Service, the National Program for IT. Spent 2 years working on that. It was absolutely fabulous, had a wonderful, wonderful time in London. But by the beginning of 2008, we realized it was time for another adventure. And an opportunity came up in Dubai. We asked ourselves, what's the worst that could happen? You know, we were young and we had no children and not too many responsibilities. So by the end of August 2008, sight unseen, we arrived in super hot, sunny Dubai. And 2 weeks later, Lehman Brothers collapsed. And then all the cranes across the Dubai skyline came to a grinding halt. So we were off to a bit of a precarious start, but we've been here now for 13 years and still loving living and working here in the UAE. At the end of 2019, I finished my executive MBA with INSEAD, and I focused very much there on digital transformation and entrepreneurialism. And I guess you could say I've been applying those transformation learnings to my own life, and they very much align with the learnings that we get from 2BYB as well, which is around understanding your strengths, understanding who you are, understanding your identity, formulating your purpose around all of that. And then once you have your purpose, working out a system that helps you to achieve that purpose. And that system obviously includes your guidelines and, very importantly, your rituals, which David, at the beginning of this call, before the recording started, you started to talk about, with a lot of the people on this call having spent the morning at boot camp, which is one of the important rituals that people follow. So probably just filling in a little bit more there on the transformation story. I think it was 2016, and we had a group conference in Orlando. And as part of that group conference, I decided to take the team over a little bit early. So we took the team from Dubai, we flew into Orlando, and we wanted to spend a bit of time having some fun on the theme park rides and all that sort of thing. And because of my size, I basically wasn't able to get on the rides. And I said to myself, well, look, I've got a family now. I want to be able to spend time enjoying life with my family. I want to be able to do all the things that I would want to do with my dad, go on rides, go skiing, go sailing, go diving, do all that sort of thing and be adventurous. And I'm not in the right shape to be able to do that. So I have to make a change. And that was really timely, because not long after that was the trip to Thailand. And that became a real catalyst for, you know, moving away from where I'd got to and moving to where I wanted to be.
Well, Paul, I'm going to take you back to 2015, because this is when I met you and I started to get to know the iron will that you showed in mounting those steps. And if I take you back to that photo, that was taken at the top of a mountain. At the same time, I think I can do this. I'll just show you in your full glory. How do I get this back?
I lost that cap.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yourself here in blue. This is you in a cave with some skinnier blokes. None of these blokes are particularly thin, but you were the largest of us. But still, you took yourself up a mountain, and it was, for the rest of us, an absolute eye-opener as to your ability to focus on a goal and achieve it. That's you propping up 12 other blokes on the left-hand end of that group. You were an enormous man. You were 140 plus kilos. Could you just tell us, describe to us, because when we can see your head, and obviously there's a lot less of that than there was there. Can you just describe to us how you look and are now?
Describe to you? Well, I can show you. I mean, like I don't know, you can see completely different size.
No, you've got a background on, so when you stand, you become leaves. You actually disappear. You go completely camouflaged, and we can't see you at all. Which means you're really skinny.
Let's do it like that.
Yeah, there's very little of you now. Flat tummy, 100 kilos or so, somewhere around there. Body fat percentage well under 20%. There's a lot of people in this group who would love to be down there under the 20% body fat mark, moving rapidly towards 15% body fat, and probably, no, that won't be it either. So you've made a huge change. Tell us on the physical side. First of all, we've heard why. Let's just dig into how.
Yeah, okay. How's a good question. I mean, as I said, I finished my executive MBA at the end of 2019, and I was not quite that shape that you just showed there. I was a little bit less, but not far away from it. And during my executive MBA, I was doing my executive MBA as well as doing my full-time professional job, as well as being a father, as well as doing a whole lot of other things. And so it really wasn't a good time to, you know, fulfill the mission of the body transformation. And it had always been my intention that 2020 would become the year where that would happen. And I think this is, you know, there's obviously a lot of terrible stories and challenging times for us all that we've gone through as part of COVID. But one of the silver linings for me was that as soon as we went into lockdown, you, David, set up the virtual rides. And what that meant was that on a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Friday morning, there was a automatic routine to fall into. And what that meant for me is getting out of bed, getting on my cross trainer, and doing an hour on Monday, an hour on Wednesday, and 90 minutes on the Friday. That was a big part of it. And that just established a habit. And we all know that once you've established a habit, it's very hard to break that habit. But establishing the habit takes a lot of time and a lot of consistency. And fortunately, because of COVID, the time that would be spent getting ready for work and traveling to work and then coming home, all of that time was taken out of the diary. And I used that time very much for health and well-being and fitness. So those virtual rides were a big part of it. The other thing that I changed, and I experimented with this previously, but have now stuck to it religiously for the past 18 months, and that is to adopt a keto style diet. And for those of you who don't know about keto, I'll try and explain it very briefly. Our bodies can either run on carbohydrates, our brains can run on sugars, carbohydrates, or they can run on ketones. And our bodies are designed to do this because from what I've read, I'm not a scientist, but from what I've read, when we were still on the savannah, there would be times of famine and times of feast. And during the times of feast, you'd eat as much food as you possibly can. But during the times of famine, you wouldn't have that. And so you'd have to convert the fat that was on your body into something that could fuel your brain. And that's ketones. So you can adopt a ketone style diet, which is high fat, which is counterintuitive to everything that everybody's ever published during the 1990s and the 1980s. You know, it was high carbohydrate, very, very low fat, don't eat fat, fat's evil, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It's completely untrue, at least for my body type. Other people will be different. And I think that's a key thing to understand, is that you have to find what works best for you. But for my body type, high fat, medium protein, and very, very low carbohydrates, which means virtually no sugar. For me, sugar is evil, basically. And now when I eat food that's high in sugar, I will, it's not, put aside alcohol, when I eat food that's high in sugar, the next day and the day after that, I will feel like I've got a hangover. Because my body basically treats it like a toxin. And the benefit of ketosis is, when you're in ketosis, is that your body switches to burning fat instead of carbohydrates. So that has another added benefit. I think the third thing is calorie intake. So you're fooling yourself if you think that you can eat as many calories as you want. It doesn't matter what you do need to make sure that the calories match up with your personal objectives. So if you're looking to lose weight, you need to have a calorie deficit. And the more that you can create that deficit, the better. And of course, one way of creating that deficit is through intake, but the other way is through output, i.e. exercise. And then I think the other very important component is sleep. So I've gotten into the habit of getting to sleep between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night. My preference is 9 o'clock, and then getting up early between 5 and 6, and then starting the day with a revision of my purpose and my values and my guidelines and all of that sort of thing, and also exercise. So it really boils down to a few very, very simple things. And I think that we get confused by all of the information that's out there, because there is so much information out there, and it's very, very hard to sort of synthesize all of that and put that into practice. But it comes down to, you know, having your purpose and living your purpose. Number two is building your system around that. And that system, if you're looking for a body transformation, rests very much on calorie intake, exercise, and sleep.
Love it. Absolutely love it. I couldn't have said it any better or explained it any more clearly. I love the idea that for you, and we are, as you point out, all very different. For you, sugar is a poison. And, and for many of us, while our bodies have got used to processing sugar, normally with some degree of retention of fat or carrying more fat than we need to, sugar, if it was discovered today, would have to be classified by our governments as a poison. It really does affect so many people around the world. We've got an epidemic of obesity, especially in Western countries, which is caused primarily by too many sugars. Now, you mentioned very clearly that your rituals now involve living on purpose and your consistency around both sleep, diet, and exercise, all three, sleep, diet, and exercise. If you were your former self 5 years ago, large, very focused, very, very brilliant at work, what would you say? Because there are many people on this meeting who are brilliant at work, but still don't have the sort of transformation that you've achieved. So what would you say to them? How would you say, how do you start? How do you get going? How do you get into that?
Yeah, well, you know about my formula that BKD also had some input into. So at the end of last year, you ran a marathon, a number of people ran half marathons, and I ran 10K. But running that 10K, I think it was in October or November, was the first time that I'd ever run 10K in my life. So I was pretty chuffed at the end of it. And while I was running that 10K, I came up with my my formula, if you like. But as I say, I don't take full credit for it because BKD's contribution to it was particularly important. But that formula was, in brackets, purpose plus consistent optimistic action. Action is really, really important. Close brackets, times by the multiplier, which is the positive, supportive, collaborative community. Positive, supportive, collaborative. If it was a negative community, then it's obviously going to take a different direction. So the real starting point there is, well, I think, you know, the positive, supportive, collaborative community is something that you need to have no matter what. But I think when it comes to wanting to make a transformation and wanting to live your life in the way that you personally want to live your life, the purpose piece is actually the starting point. And rather than, and to get to the purpose piece is not easy. It's not something you just pluck out of thin air. You can't just say, oh, my purpose is X. You know, it takes a lot of effort and work to understand your purpose. And the way I try and explain that, and the reason behind why that's so important is through a really basic analogy between. So imagine that you've got an individual who wants to be exceptional at some form of sport. And imagine fancifully, if that person was thinking, I don't know whether I want to be a sumo wrestler or a marathon runner, right? Well, you can't be both. You can't be both a sumo wrestler and a marathon runner, but you'll need to be considering the same things. What's my purpose in life? What's my goal? What are the things I need to eat? What is the training regime that I need? What are the people that I need to around me? What support do I need? You know, what does my regime look like? How am I going to achieve my goals? All of those sorts of things are going to be the same types of considerations, but the answer to those things is going to be completely different depending upon what purpose you've set for yourself. So if you haven't understood what your purpose is and clearly understood that for in yourself, it's going to be very hard to make decisions that make sense for you. So I do think starting with developing a clear understanding of your purpose. Now, this is for me, obviously. For me, this has worked. I can't sit here and say this is something that's going to work for absolutely everybody. But getting a clear understanding of your purpose, how do you get to a clear understanding of your purpose is the next, I think, step in the discussion. How do you actually do that? So for me, again, it's my personal experience, and I can't speak for everybody, but my personal experience is you start by exploring things like your strengths. So I think the Clifton Strength Finder assessment that you do with 2BYB is an excellent place to start. And once you understand your strengths, you'll understand more about what makes you tick as an individual. You'll understand your balcony in your basement. And by working on that balcony piece, you'll understand what the best version of yourself looks like. So I think the Strengths Finder piece is a good place to start. The absolute other critical element, in my view, is your values. And although a lot of us will share common values, the priority of those values will be different for everybody. And what's more important for you from a values perspective will also guide your purpose. So for me, I love life. You know, that's a big part of my values system, that my love for life. I love excellence. And you know, I love being around excellence. I love delivering excellence, and I love creating value for clients and for friends and for people around me. I love value creation. So those three elements are the core values of my purpose. And I think you also got to take into account your environment. You know, what's realistic? You know, you don't want to create a purpose statement that says, I want to be the first person on Mars, if that's just not realistic. You know, so you do need to obviously be optimistic, but it needs to be a realistic optimism. And so whatever your purpose is needs to fit your environment as well. And sure, you need to take account of your weaknesses, but that's part of being realistic. And it's not about focusing on those weaknesses. It's about focusing on your strengths and just understanding, well, you know, those are my weaknesses. They're not the things that are going to move the needle for me. The things that are going to move the needle for me are my strengths. Let's focus on those. So I would say, start with your purpose, explore the purpose, understand who you are, what identity you want for yourself, what your values are, what the environment looks like, and then talk about that with people. You know, try it out. Speak with your, not necessarily your colleagues, but certainly speak with your trusted members of your community about that purpose and see what they have to say about it, and toss it around a bit. And then write it down, because if you haven't written it down, it doesn't really become a reality. And then keep reminding yourself of it. That's what I do. I just keep reminding myself of it all the time. And I find that really helps to keep me focused on what I'm trying to do.
The great Mick Todd, who I don't think is on this meeting at the moment, it's a dodgy time in Australia, obviously. He would always say, because you started this whole conversation with people, he'd always say that you are the average of the 5 people you spend most time with. I absolutely love, and I'm mirroring, I guess, your use of the word love, because we must have heard you say that so far 8 or 10 times. You put emotion into everything you do. And I see that as a key differentiator between people like you who really achieve stuff and people who just talk about achieving stuff. I'd like to take you back into your world of work, where you are you're 6'2" for a start, but you are a very imposing leader within DLA Piper. Can you share with us some of the key aspects around your style of leadership? Now, everybody, I didn't warn Paul of any of these questions, so we're going to test him on how fast he can think on his feet here.
Yeah, so a lot of what I've just talked about is equally applicable in the corporate setting or any organizational setting. Purpose, system, rituals, values, community. In fact, I would say everything that I've just talked about is equally applicable. But again, the answers will be different depending on your context. So when my first main leadership role within the firm as a partner was taking on the location head role for our IPT practice here in the Middle East. And when I did that, I spent some time bringing the team together, all of the members of the team, So I was the only partner in the team, but I brought together all of the members of the team. And when I say all the members of the team, we were only, 12, 13 people. But that included our secretaries, our junior lawyers, our senior lawyers, and those people who are on the path to partnership. And we spent time talking through the identity that we wanted to have in the market. And I asked the team, in 2 or 3 years' time, what would you personally like to be able to say to your friends and family about where you have achieved, what you've achieved, what you do, what reputation effectively would you like to have in 2 to 3 years' time? And it kept coming back to being the go-to team for what we do in our market. We wanted to be able to say to our friends and our colleagues and our peers and the community that when it comes to the work that we do for our clients, we are the go-to team. And so that's the identity that we really wanted to form. And then we talked about it and worked through what we would need to do as a team to make that a reality. And then 2 to 3 years' time later, we were ranked as the only firm in Band 1 in Legal 500 and Chambers, which are the 2 leading legal directories for our technology, media, and telecoms practice. So across the UAE, there's lots of firms that are working in that space, but we were the only firm to be ranked Band 1 in both Legal 500 and in Chambers. And so we basically fulfilled that purpose of being the go-to team and having that recognized in the market. And after achieving that, we developed the team motto, teamwork makes the dream work. And when I say that, some people cringe and they think it's so cheesy, but I tell you what, it's so true. Teamwork absolutely does make the dream work. And the opposite, dream work makes the team work. When you're doing fantastic work for fantastic clients, there's a real sense of meaning and there's a real sense of achievement in doing that. So I guess if I was to sort of step back from that and look at that objectively, I'd say my leadership style is one of being open and inclusive, and realizing that as a leader, I don't have all the answers. No leader can have all the answers. It always relies upon teamwork to get to where you want to go as an organization. Sure, you can as an individual achieve a lot, but as the saying goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that go far, go together principle, again, one that Mick repeats all the time, is something that I also very much believe in. And it is also about making sure that people in the team realize that playing to their strengths is far more important than worrying about their weaknesses. Because if you are a team that's playing to their strengths, then somebody else will complement you with their own strengths where you're weak. And although it pains me to say this, I always think of Johnny Wilkinson kicking the winning field goal at the World Cup. Johnny Wilkinson's strength was kicking field goals, apart from doing other things. If he was focused on being an exceptional hooker or an exceptional flanker or whatever else, rather than the position that he played and the strengths that he had, perhaps he wouldn't have kicked that field goal. But he was the guy who went to the football field early in the morning and just kicked those goals over and over and over and over and over again to become exceptional at what he did, knowing that all of those other things that need to be done on the football field would be somebody else's responsibility, and trusting that those other people would fulfill those responsibilities with the same level of exceptionalism as he did.
That is, I was listening to you speak about, and for about 5 minutes there, in what is an exceptional monologue around business and successful teamwork, you didn't use the word I once, not once. It was we. And I'm rapidly seeing that there's a theme in what you do, whether it is around your transformation or around your team, and that is that it's about other people. And you've drummed into us that you are reflective of the people that you spend most time with, that your team was something you brought together and that was every part of the team. Can I take you away from that and just say, how does that apply to being a family man and fitting that into what we've seen already as sport and work? How do you manage to balance out having a wife and 2 children, and they are in their formative years?
Yeah, it's challenging, but because Jules and I have been together since we were 16, there is a very, very strong partnership, and we have conversations every day about what we're doing. I mean, we are a team. Jules is my best friend, and we work together as a team, and we know what our responsibilities are and what we're doing, and we support each other in that and have a constant dialogue. Thinking back, we got married. We then worked out that we wanted to go overseas. That was a critical thing for us to do. We then went overseas. We then made the most of that when we were in London. We then realized that we didn't want to stay in London the rest of our lives. I said to Jules, I said to her at the beginning of 2008, I said, do you want to live here the rest of your life? And she said, no. And I said, well, maybe now's the right time to make a move because the city is about to tank. And that's when we started looking at places all across the world, and we landed on Dubai. But that was an open dialogue between us, and we decided that Dubai was the place to come. And then when we got to Dubai, I said right at the start that it was a precarious time, but we got through that. And I remember, I don't know whether we'd come back from London or whether we'd come back from Australia, but we'd come back from one of our trips to one of our homes, because I still feel like London's a home when I get back there. But we came back from one of our trips and we were walking around Sapper Park, which was still Sapper Park as we used to know it, rather than Sapper Park as it is today. And we were walking around Sapper Park, and I said to Jules, where do you want to live? Do you want to live here, London, or Brisbane? And she said, without any hesitation, here. And so we then set our long-term objectives on working here. But we've always had an open dialogue around where do we want to be in the future. And we definitely want to be back in Brisbane in the future. And the main reason that we want to be back in Brisbane in the future is for our kids and our wider family. So I'm very keen for Magnus and Ruby. Magnus is turning 9 in July and Ruby just turned 7. I'm very keen for them to spend time living and growing up in Australia and getting the same experiences that Jules and I had, but also to develop better and closer relationships with their grandparents. Now, that's not everybody's objective. That's our objective. That's what we want to do. So we're now, working towards making that a reality. That's been a long-term ambition, and we're now, that's probably not too far away, but we're working towards making that a reality. So it's a partnership, and in the true sense of the word, partnership, it's a friendship, and it helps us to make sure that we're making good decisions along the way. And then when it comes to our children, Magnus and Ruby, I always try and make sure that there's a sufficient amount of time on the weekend to have quality time with them, and also make sure that we have our family holidays, and when on family holidays, be able to really put aside work and everything else so that the focus is purely on the family. But in the day-to-day, it's about, using what time is available to spend time with them. But it wouldn't be right for me to think that I need to spend hours and hours each day with my kids, because if I was doing that, I wouldn't be fulfilling my responsibilities that actually will be a greater benefit to them and to Jules in the longer term.
Paul, I'm taking notes rapidly here because although my children are older than yours, I think that this is something that we can all learn for as we go, in my case, towards grandparenthood. It's I know how balanced your life is because I see you probably once a week, and we talk about this sort of stuff. Um, in order to keep that balance into the future, what is your planning horizon? How far out do you look in terms of this dream that makes the team work?
I think there's multiple planning horizons. It's not having one, it's having multiple planning horizons. Obviously, you want the long, for me, one of my strengths is futurist. So I do enjoy looking into the future and thinking about what's going to happen. And quite often that thinking process is almost automatic. It's not a laborious one. So I guess I have a very long distance view, and then I sort of bring it back to where I am right now. But I think generally speaking, you need to be thinking about your week, your month, the next 6 months, the next year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, and probably even beyond that, 20 years.
Wow. I hope you understand how extraordinary that is for most of us.
Well, I don't know because I'm not in your heads, but that's how I approach it. That's how I've kind of always approached it.
Oh, fantastic. I'm gonna take you back now. And so we've got your planning horizons, which go out forever, and also involve the week. So there's a real structure to your futurist going forward. But I'm going to take you backwards now to something you said earlier, and that is that you live your life and you run your teams and you run your family around values. Tell me, how did you divine or find your values? How did you work out what those were?
Yeah, multiple ways actually. So working with Mick, he has a nice technique that probably a lot of people on this call have also used, which is he'll ask you, what do you hate? And quite often people will very easily be able to identify what they hate. And what they hate will be effectively the reverse of that will be their values. So I hate it when people don't do what they say. So your value is integrity. You know, I hate it when people lie. Okay, so your value is to be truthful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a really useful exercise. One exercise that I found really powerful was one that was run by one of our professors at INSEAD at the end of our time at INSEAD. So right at the end of doing the executive MBA, one of the professors, we had a room full of 60 students, and he took us through an experiential assessment of our values. And the way that that worked was that he would ask you to think of a time when, so actually put yourself in the mindset of being in that experience. Think of a time when you felt great because of an achievement. Think of a time when you felt upset because of something. Think of it, think of a time, yada, yada, yada. And now in 1 or 2 or 3 words, explain why, what, and from a values perspective. And so then you ended up with this desktop of Post-it notes with all these different statements around values. And then he asked us to do an analysis and a synthesis of that, which led to a top level 2 or 3 values, and then 5 values underneath that, and then more values underneath that. And basically the way it works is that you've got these baseline values, but they sort of work their way up to your really absolute epitome values, if you like, the top values that you have. And I found that really, really valuable. Another example was when I got made partner when I first got made partner, we had this exercise in London, and they did a similar thing. They gave all the partners these cards, and on the cards were different values, and there was an approach made by where you had to basically remove things that were less important to you until you got to the final card. And in the context of being a lawyer, the final card for me was excellence. That was the thing that really stood out. So there's lots of different approaches, I think, to understanding your values. And I would say try multiple approaches because it will give you different perspective. And then once you've tried those multiple approaches, again, have conversations with people about them, but ultimately write them down so that you can be clear about what those values are and why they're important to you.
Perfect. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah. Okay. You're a lifelong learner. There's no doubt that, I mean, INSEAD, the executive MBA in 2019, pretty heavy, high octane stuff. On a daily basis, how do you exercise that enormous muscle in the cranium?
Well, on the best days, well, first of all, it starts the day before, doesn't it? You know, get to bed early and get up early. So I think rest is very important. High quality rest is very important. And then getting up early before all the buzz of the day starts. I'll tell you one thing for certain. Checking your email first thing in the morning is the worst thing that you can do. At least for me. So again, I don't want to sound like this is a one size fits all approach because it's not. But for me, checking email first thing in the morning is often something that distracts me. And I'd be much better off just putting that to the side and focusing on my morning ritual. So a best morning ritual would be me getting up, having a cup of coffee, and then doing my exercise for around about an hour. And then after doing my exercise for around about an hour, having a good breakfast, spending a little bit of time with the family before the kids go off to school, and then getting stuck into work. Now, what does getting stuck into work look like? The first thing is then going through the email, seeing what's come in, adding things to my to-do list. I use the Microsoft app To Do, and using that to-do list to then pull out the things on my to-do list that are the ones that I'm going to get done in that day. And as things come in during the day, keeping that to-do list up to date, but still focusing on the things that need to be done in that day and ticking those off. And so I guess it's, and so while ticking those things off and getting those things done, trying not to be distracted by everything else that's going on around you. So things that I will do, for example, would be, I don't have notifications on my WhatsApp or anything like that, because that would be a distraction. I'll put my phone onto silent. I'll turn my inbox off so that emails can't come in, and I'll turn my Skype off so that people can't get in touch with me. So I'm basically trying, and I don't do this perfectly and I don't do it all the time, but trying to give myself the headspace to be able to focus on what is before me and I've decided is the priority for today, and then block out all of that distraction and noise so that I can get those things done. But at the same time, having time within the day to then focus on the noise, if you like, work out what needs to be done and dealing with those immediate things that do need to be done, but then blocking out the noise again and getting back into the focus. Does that make sense?
It does, perfectly. Do you get time? And if you have time, what do you read?
Well, I read all day, every day. And so reading is less of a pleasure for me because I just do spend so much time reading. And, I haven't got one here at the moment, but, well, that's the contracts that we produce. It's not like reading, but it is reading. And so, you don't necessarily feel, I don't really feel like doing a lot of reading beyond on that, but that doesn't mean to say that I don't read. So what do I read? I've been reading James Clear's
Atomic Habits.
Yeah, Atomic Habits, which is great. I have been reading to my kids. So we've been reading Charlotte's Web and we've been reading Harry Potter, and that's always fun. That's actually probably the most enjoyable reading, to be honest, reading with the kids. And I also do some listening. So I'm a big fan of Wilbur Smith. I like the old adventure stories and So I read and listen to Wilbur Smith. And then probably the other main area of reading would be around management related books. So I love Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So those types of books I also find quite interesting.
For everybody else, we will put some of this stuff out afterwards, just so that you can pick up on things like James Clear and Stephen Covey.
And the other one that I started reading is Jordan Peterson. I sort of tend to dip in and dip out, but Jordan Peterson, I really like a lot of what Jordan Peterson has to say. I think he has a bad rep in some places, but he's also got a very good reputation. And I think one thing that's unarguable is he's a very, very deep thinker. And one of the things he talks about, and I think this is really cool, and actually this is very much factored into my purpose statement and guidelines and everything else, is that true meaning, real meaning, is that line between order and chaos. And true growth is that line between order and chaos. So if you think of the yin and yang symbol, which has got the white side and the dark side, the yin and the yang, it's that line in between them where that true growth and true meaning can be found. And what he means by that, based upon what he's said in his book and what I've listened to, is that if you were totally stuck in order, everything was just right in terms of order, then you would be ultimately decaying. There'd be no growth. You'd just be stuck in order. There'd be no growth. It would be boring, basically. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum, which is you're completely stuck in chaos. Well, if you're completely stuck in chaos, you're not going to be moving forward either. You're going to be stuck in chaos. It's going to be possibly very, very destructive. And so it's about having a foot in both, or a hand in both, or being across both. Having some order, having some things that keep you stable, having some things in your life that give you structure, but also pushing yourself outside of that, pushing yourself into the uncomfortable, and knowing that uncomfortable feeling is the growth. Knowing that being uncomfortable is the growth. Now, it could be, for me, I'm probably more prone to structure than I am chaos. David, I think you're probably more prone to chaos than you are structure, but there's also a lot of structure in your life, as you know, I mean, with the rituals and with the writing and with everything else. So having a blend of both is the healthy way.
Love it. Absolutely vital insight. I'm going to open it up to the floor and invite anybody, and we are 24, 25 people on this meeting. Has anybody got, and just go for it, first to speak wins, questions? And floor is open.
I'll throw one at you, Paul, if that's okay. I'm really interested in being able to transfer success, however you want to define success, from one domain to another domain. Sometimes you'll see people being really successful in one domain, but really struggling in another domain. So I'm really curious about your thoughts on how transferable are success behaviors from domain to domain.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And as you would have seen from that photo at the start, there was a time when I wasn't at all successful in the physical space, right? So, and there was a time before that where I was, when I was at school, I did a lot of sport and, loved it. But what happened was that my ambition was to become the best IT lawyer that I could be, right? And so I put so much focus on that I wasn't focusing on other very important parts of my life. And what became very apparent to me as I got older was that actually not putting some focus on those other very important parts of my life would ultimately undermine that success that I'd had in the ambition space, my earlier ambition, right? So I came to the realization that taking a holistic approach is what is essential. Now, that doesn't mean doing everything at the same time, because if you try to do everything at the same time, what's probably going to happen is you're going to have mediocre results in lots of different spaces. So you do have to set your priorities. And as I said, my priority during my executive MBA was to do my executive MBA and get my, and manage and maintain and, you know, be successful in my practice. So I didn't then also try and put on top of that, let's do the body transformation during my executive MBA. I waited until after finishing the executive MBA and then gave that the full force. But what I would say is it is about taking a holistic approach and then working out where your priorities are that will move you forward in those areas without putting a whole lot of, again, for me, without putting a whole lot of pressure on myself that I must do that all at the same time, or that I have to, you have to, another thing that our INSEAD professors would say to us at the very end, which is, you know, you've got to be kind to yourself. You really have to do everything at the same time. So, best way to be kind to yourself is work out where your priorities are right now and focus on those, knowing that the other priorities can be focused on at the next stage, and then having the discipline at the next stage to then focus on those priorities and keep moving forward.
Paul, could I just ask you, you've got a very calm and grounded way about you. I can't picture you in a crisis, flapping or getting overexcited by it. But the road to great success always has significant obstacles on it along the way. What are your coping strategies or your coping mechanisms when you're faced with an unforeseen obstacle that pops up, either for you within your career team or within your family team? How do you assess and deal with those obstacles on the road?
Yeah, it's a great question. Because I'm a futurist, I probably do see those obstacles possibly coming up. That's part of it, I think. So, for example, I tend to put 2 and 2 together and work out what might happen in the future. And I think almost to be a good lawyer, you have to be able to do that because you're doing a risk assessment. So you're thinking, okay, well, these are some of the different scenarios that could play out. And based upon those scenarios that could play out, how are we going to manage the risk around that? But you're right, there are little crises and big crises that come up, and sometimes they do catch you unawares. And I think my single biggest coping mechanism for that is knowing that if you do the right things, then the right things will happen. And by applying that in the past, it's worked. And so why won't applying that now also work? So basically looking back and saying, well, we've managed to get this far. That doesn't mean we apply the same solutions, but we'll find the solutions and we will apply them because that's what we've done in the past. And that's what we're going to do now. And then things will be okay in the future. So just, I guess, it's logical almost, and just trying not to get too emotional about the current situation. Everybody gets emotional immediately. What's going on? This is crazy. But then after just cooling your jets a little bit, working it through, talking to people, agreeing a plan of attack, implementing it, and then away you go. Does that make sense?
Great answer. Thanks.
Okay, cool.
Paddy's on, but he's on mute.
Paddy, you're on mute.
How's that? Is that better?
Yep.
Thanks, Paul. Really fascinating. Your description of the different chaos and structure I found very interesting, and it reminded me of the question that I want to ask you, which is I'm just at that point where I've identified values with Mick, and really the purpose, that sense of purpose, or identifying the purpose. I mean, the thing that reminded me of it, you saying that the growth is at that border between chaos and structure, is that certainty is not the destiny of man. I don't know who said it, but I've always remembered that phrase for years.
Love it.
Who was it?
No, I said I love it. Certainty.
Yeah, it's somebody said it, and it's a very well known, but certainty is not the destiny of man. And I think that's, I'm struggling a little bit with this idea of purpose. I mean, at one level, it's very philosophical and existential. At what level of abstraction is it? I mean, obviously, it's something that you said. You know, it's good if you talk about it with other people. I'm not really even there yet in terms of trying to. I'm struggling with at what level of abstraction it is, or how concrete it is, because if one thinks of it, it tends to feed into what you want to achieve, and then that it's not that either. It's not just what you want to achieve. So I'd love any help you can give me on that, would be very welcome.
Yeah, and I think it's not a one size fits all answer, but and maybe if I could start explaining it by just saying that when I was leaving Australia back in 2004, I never ever set a destination in mind. It wasn't like I said, and by this date I'm going to be in Dubai. And you see what I mean? Like, I think it's more about a direction of travel than it is about a destination.
Sure. Yeah.
In fact, I would say that there is no destination. It's just that there's lots of exceptional things that happen along the journey. There's no destination. I mean, the only destination depends on your religious views, but the only destination that we absolutely know about is that we're going to die at some point in our lives. And while that sounds morbid, I think there's a lot of joy in that as well, because it gives you the motivation to make the most of that life. But I wouldn't say it's about the destination. I would say it's about the journey, and knowing that even once you've achieved one thing, there are other things that you can do. And it's not even about achievement necessarily, it's about experience and enjoying that experience and growing from that experience and giving to others during that experience. So it's not, I would say it's a fairly high level of abstraction, Paddy. I would say it's, you know, it's not so high that but it's what's really important. What's really, really important is that it means something to you. It means something to you, and it's something that provides you with a focal point around which you can say, and so I want to achieve this objective. These are some of the objectives that I want to achieve because it will help me fulfill my purpose. These are some of the systems I need to put in place because it will help me to deliver on my objectives. These are some of the community that I need to build relationships because it will support me with all of that. But I am a very structured kind of thinker. And I like structure, as I said before. So that works for me. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you or everybody else. But for me, I will tell you, mine is visionary value created with values, right? Because values for me are very, very important. And as I said earlier on, I love creating value and I love excellence, and I'm a futurist. So, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a futurist, but futurist is one of my top 5 strengths. So, you know, visionary value created with values for me, and that's very high level abstract, but I know what it means for me. Yeah. And underneath that, there are things that I'm working on which allow me to feel like I'm living my purpose.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think the focus on the experience reminds me of what it is, the importance of unifying recognition of what's most important to you in terms of experience along the way, along the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
As I said before, was love life. That's one of my top ones. So although the actual statement doesn't say love life, when I read that, or when I think about it, that's number one value. Yeah.
So anybody else want to throw one at Paul before I think?
Good morning, Paul. This is Medric speaking. Sorry, I'm not on video. I watched the football match late last night as a Frenchman, so you can imagine I had other priorities last night. But my question to you is, you know, life is a journey, and we all have purposes at different times. I found the opposite. I felt I had a strong purpose, and that purpose collapsed in 2018. Have you come across this point of how do you reinvent your purpose as we all evolve and grow over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important question. I have said before that I don't think that my purpose will be static. I think that over time, over life, and I'm pretty confident of that because, as I said earlier, my purpose when I left Australia was to be I don't know if I said it in this way, but it was to be the best IT lawyer that I could be. That was my purpose back then. It was very focused and it was very narrowly defined. And then when I got to London, I'd written that all down. That was very much why I was there, very much my focus. And so being the best IT lawyer I could be was how I lived my life when I was in London. And that meant, you know, getting up at 5 a.m. to get on trains to go up to Birmingham and to Leeds and spending, you know, very late nights and weekends working and doing all that sort of stuff, but loving it because it was totally aligned with what I was wanting to achieve and it was totally aligned with my purpose at the time. Now that's no longer my purpose. Being the best IT lawyer I can be is no longer my purpose. And I've realized that I need a broader way of looking at things, which is why I've adopted this visionary value creator with values. And I'm sorry to hear that your sort of purpose collapsed, but I do think that it's totally probable that with some effort around the sorts of things that I've been talking about today and working with the right people and coach and community, that you can establish a purpose that does make sense for you going forward. Because I think purpose definitely does, in my case, evolve. It doesn't need to be completely static.
Thank you.
Paul, sorry, just on that point, could I revisit your formula that you and Ben developed? Hi, Ben, how are you, mate? Long time no see. You had, in brackets, purpose plus...
Optimistic or consistent optimistic action. Close brackets. And then times by positive, supportive, collaborative community.
Fantastic. I just want to explore that and understand that. It sounds to my engineering brain to be, I like formulae. So thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else, please? Well, what I heard from that and my version of Paul's purpose and his value statement, I hear identity rather than achievement. And it was Paddy who brought up this idea of, you know, what is my purpose? It is to achieve something. And of course, then he reined back from that and said, no, of course it isn't. And it's about the journey. But the journey is to an identity in my mind. And maybe that is something, how do you square your value statement with an identity, if I've got that right, Paul?
I mean, I think this is also something James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits. I mean, he talks very much about creating an identity. I think it's probably more about, I don't know, for me, I feel it's more about knowing my identity.
Know thyself.
Know thyself. I think for me, it's more about knowing who you really are and being the best version of that.
Fantastic.
Rather than thinking I need to create something that I'm not. It's about knowing who you really are and being the best version of yourself. I like to think of it more like that than trying to turn yourself into something that you're not. Because I'm a very big believer in that we all have to, very big believer, I'd say all of us have to be true to ourselves.
Yeah, fantastic.
If you try to be someone other than yourself, that's where the high level of anxiety is going to be. That's where you're going to find lots of problems. Now, that doesn't mean you're not pushing yourself to improve, but push yourself to improve in the areas that you love, not the areas that somebody else wants you to be pushing yourself into.
Awesome. Guys, girls, at this point, I'm just going to ask Paul one more question. If anybody else wants to jump in, do so now. Paul, you've got, and I've stolen this from Tim Ferriss, you've got a billboard. Oh, let's say it's on Shakeside Road. Huge billboard. What do you put on it?
Me, I'd put on love life.
Perfect. Absolutely superb. I can sum up everything you said in about 4 words, I think, and that was people, strengths, values, and finally love, because it comes across in spades that your emotional maturity is something that defines you and that identity that I mentioned. In everything you've said, it's all about people, and you put people first in every answer that you've given us today. Strengths, values, and love. I think I can speak for everybody on this meeting today in saying that you are absolutely inspirational in what you've done, but also in the way you think about life. And on behalf of all of us, I want to say a huge thank you for your time. I know you're very busy today. You know, you've got all sorts of global partner shit to do. Outstanding. Thank you very much for your time. Cheers.
You're welcome.